educational distributor called the Cinema Guild. And Cinema Guild sells to schools, universities, higher education directly. So we've been doing great sales to a lot of universities all over the country. And I've been selling educational DVDs to a lot of movement locals and other activist groups. So that's been our first spot. And then it seems as though by late April or May, we're going to hit our first consumer sales, which is going to be through the digital venues, things like iTunes, Netflix, Hulu, that level. And then after that, potentially public TV, but we'll do also direct physical home video sales after that. So by May, I expect it to be available to the general public.
Over to your left, Sasha.
Yes, sir.
You did bring out in the first part of that we came to the United Mine Workers, did you not?
The United Mine Workers?
Yeah.
Well, that's sort of John Lewis's story and the founding of the CIO, yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get a lot of argument with the fellow that that's where we came from. I was one of the first ones to fire and that place organized it with the UAW at that time. I committed from the United Mine Workers. I did with there, and that's what I was taught at the very beginning. I want to clear that up, if that was some kind of a myth or if that was actually back.
No, that was, yeah, I mean, that's the early founding of the CIO. Yes?
You share the story how you got Mark Sheen to narrate the film?
Sure, happily. We actually were finished shooting all the film, and we were halfway through the edit. I have a fantastic editor, Deborah Paris, who's done a lot of PBS, HBO-style historical films. And I didn't initially think that we needed a narrator. We have such great interviews with all the politicians and the Reuthers themselves and all these oral histories that I thought, I don't really need someone else to talk over them. They can tell their whole story. So we get about halfway through the edit, and Deborah leans over to me and she says, Sasha, there's all these wonderful anecdotes and stories from your family, but this is going to be an educational film, and I fear that we don't have a lot of the high-level history covered. So either we need a lot of text on screen, or somebody's going to have to sort of speak out that voice. So I started writing myself the narration, and I spoke it initially, and I didn't really want to insert myself as a character into the film. I wanted their generation to speak it, and I didn't want to necessarily be a character. So I went on a hunt to try to find someone reasonably affordable, a known voice that could compete with the Reuthers and Senator Kennedy and people like that. Spoke to a lot of different agents that represented some Hollywood folks, and just found a dead end all the way through. It just wasn't affordable, and I almost gave up until I called Paul Schrade, who's in the film, who was the West Coast Regional Director of the UAW at that time. A little younger than the Reuther generation. He had been very close with the farm workers movement on the West Coast, and a couple of Hollywood types that marched with him for the farm workers. And Martin Sheen was one of those people. And he said, I haven't spoken to him in probably 10 years, but I have a phone number that I think is of his agent. Try to give it a call, but no promises. So I call this number. There's an automated machine that I leave a voice message on. And I say, who I am, and I'm doing this film about my family history, and I'm trying to reach Mr. Sheen. 5 minutes later, Martin Sheen calls me back himself. This was his home number that I happened to reach. And here's this voice from Apocalypse Now and the West Wing, and he didn't have to introduce himself. Obviously, I knew who this guy was. And he before I could even just thank him for calling me back, he said, Sasha, I have to say to you, Walter Reuther was my biggest hero growing up. And I've been waiting for someone to tell this story, and it's so fantastic that someone within the family is going to tell it, and how can I help you? So he was just it was unbelievably like a godsend that he would be available and so enthusiastic about doing this film. And he basically said, if you can come out to Santa Monica where I am, there's a recording studio nearby. I won't ask any kind of fee that I would typically take. If you can just make a modest donation to one of my causes out here, which were the farm workers, I'd be happy to help you. And so that's really the basis of that story. He was amazing. I've still been in touch with him. He hopes at some point to come out for a bigger screening and we can do sort of a Q&A together. And he's a big pro union guy, so he was amazing.
Yeah. You ever think about doing a Lordstown movie?
Sorry.
There's a lot of history here.
Hey.
You could call us a wildcatter. Wildcatter right that from here.
I would love
to tell you about that, and that's what got us where we are today.
I would love to be honest. I mean, I sort of see this as a bit of the beginning of my career. I mean, I've done a lot of other film work, but this is my first sort of launch into doing a labor story. And of course, I would tell the family piece, but I don't see that as the end game. I would love to do even as a follow-up what's going on today and how a story like this relates. I get that a lot. I mean, the audiences that I sit with, they see how this film relates to today, but they talk about maybe a part two with how the activists, how the UAW is fighting today, but maybe how a lot of other unions can work together to fight the common fight. So I think this is just one in many labor and working people's stories in general that I can tell.
You shared a story about Senator Kennedy.
Yeah, another key character in our film, another gentleman I just wasn't sure. He's one that I had been seeking throughout making this film. When we started making it, it was late 2007. Probably about a year prior to that, I had known we were going to produce this film, and I was calling the senator's office. My family, my father, everyone had stayed in touch with the Kennedys through the years. And I basically, every couple months, would follow up with his handlers and Senator Kennedy's people saying, any opportunity we could sneak a few minutes with the senator. And it took about a year and a half or so. We were almost done shooting. It was really, okay, I was almost thinking about who else can we interview that can tell the Kennedy story. And suddenly, one random Monday, I get a call from his direct assistant that says, Sasha, on Wednesday morning, can you get to Washington? The senator has 20 minutes for you. And I just quickly gathered the whole team together, and on that Wednesday morning, we were in Washington, set up in a hotel room, and he comes strolling in with his people and sits down, and he's the master, always was the master of the soundbite. He was really like, everything he said was so, wonderfully interesting about how intricately tied in labor and politics were during that time, how the Kennedys and Reuthers really had this sort of brotherly bond. I think that also I felt my impression of him was that he was so used to, throughout his whole career, talking about a lot of the same stories and about his brothers, and a lot of interviewers would ask him the same questions, but nobody had asked him about the Reuthers and the UAW in so long. So I think he probably wished there was more than 20 minutes to talk about the different experiences. And he talked about the fight for national health care and how even in the late 60s, Walter Reuther, as told the story, was a big proponent for that and pushed a young Senator Kennedy to say, you should pick up this mantle, this is a very important fight, we in the UAW will be behind you in this. So he made sure to tell a bit of that story to me too. So he was amazing. Yes, sir.
Someone once said this famous quote.
Where am I looking?
Oh, here on the side.
Oh, okay.
Did you ever hear that?
Yes. If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it just might be a duck. Walter Reuther.
Absolutely.
That's great. Thank you.
Sasha, I would just like to say, I think this film probably would do a lot of good for a lot of people, even public officials in our state. I thank you for coming here, thank you for producing it, but it needs to be mass produced. Because we have a lot of folks in Columbus right now that don't get it. And some of them, quite frankly, aren't always sitting on the other side of the aisle, even though it's the majority. And I'll tell you, Glenn and I chuckled a little bit, I think, when we saw the Nebraska senator. Said, boy, Glenn, the Republicans haven't changed much, have they? And I have to tell you, we have this right-wing governor called John Kasich, and he's going to be up for re-election. And there were a lot of moderate people that voted for John Kasich 2 years ago in this state. Because you know why? They don't understand that story. They don't understand that story. And I think we all better wake up. I thank people like Glenn Johnson and Jim Graham and Bill Bowers and the guys that really fought in your family. But we have a big job. We better get our act together, all of us, not only in the state of Ohio, but in other states, because the right-wing Republicans are coming after us. And thank you. Thank you very much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And just to follow up to that, let's stay in contact. If there's any way for me to further distribute, and there are specific folks that need to get the film, I'm happy to begin to build that list. And whether it's even if they're not able to see it on one of the digital venues, I'll put a big box of DVDs together and we can work it out. Because I'm just as much focused on making sure when the big elections come up, this film is shown at the right time. So I'm happy to be in touch about getting it out there.
Just
Yeah.
realize That's Ron Gerberry. He is a House Rep down in Columbus. He represents us. And, the young man sitting next to him is Frank Pluto. He's the Trumbull County Commissioner. So when he was talking, I wanted to bring you into the concept of what he was talking about.
Oh, and sorry, actually, my wife just reminded me, we have been in talks, speaking of potential screenings for legislators, I've been in talks with the Department of Labor in Washington for about 6 to 9 months. A couple of folks there saw the film when we did a DC screening at a film festival there, and they've been very excited about it, and they want to do a Capitol Hill screening at some point, maybe even at the Department of Labor, with folks like Senator Harkin and Sandy Levin and Conyers, obviously, and a good group of folks. I mean, these are people that are already very pro-labor, but doing some kind of screening like that on the Hill can't hurt. So we're trying to make that happen as well. I guess.
I think this should be shown to every high school class. History class.
We're trying to push for that hard as well, because I feel it's, when you mention that, had I not grown up in this family, my high school never taught any of these. We learned civil rights, but these characters never showed up. There was no labor history, and this is across the board, everyone of my generation. So half of this was, I grew up around a fascinating, exciting story, and as a filmmaker, there's a big drama to tell here, but the other half is out of frustration. Why didn't I know about this history? Why does none of my generation know about this history? Something is wrong there. So I felt this was, my duty somewhat to tell a piece of this history. Yes, it's exciting, but it's something that, is part of the fabric of our nation. It built the middle class. Why don't we, as my generation, certainly younger and some older, know anything about this? This really was sad.
I agree. I'm new at GM. I'm a new union member, and I'm anxious to learn, which they've done. But watch this film just made me realize what people went through for this, and actually, I'm happy to be a part of it now. So I agree that it should be put out there for everyone to see.
Great, thank you. Yes, sir.
Is the documentary going to be on YouTube? I find a trailer on there for it, but not.
So yeah, we have a trailer up now. We're trying to go through some of the venues where there actually is somewhat of a license fee attached to it, so we can actually recoup some of the expenses we've made. So YouTube would be more of a free venue at the moment, so we're trying to do the iTunes and the Netflix and things like that first. I'm sure it'll be on YouTube at some point, but I think we'll do some of these, iTunes is more of a rental and sales, and then Netflix and things like that. But I'm sure at some point we'll be on YouTube as well.
My name is John Gay, retiree. I was born and raised in the South, and I never knew. It was very instrumental, educational for me to be a part of that era, being in that struggle for equality and all that stuff. But I never knew in my wildest dream that the UAW and Reuther was joining that fight, That's very instrumental to know. I'm glad you brought the road to show us, and it's very educational. Very, very good. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Karen. I just want to say that I don't know how to put it in words. Sometimes I'm really working. It's sad to look at the politicians today.
Do you understand?
It's sad to see what there is today compared to what there was then, and the passion they had for what they felt, and they gave it to all. And today, you don't see it. And that's why it was a million strong, because it was out there, it was in people's faces, people forget it. Today they don't get it, they bash me and
I just want everyone, they don't have to go on YouTube. You can go on the Ohio channel. And if you want to see passion, you watch Bobby Hagan and me give them hell on the floor. And I'm telling you. And I will be giving them hell Tuesday. And then on the floor Wednesday, turn it on live, because they're passing 2 more repressive voting bills on Wednesday on this floor. And Tuesday it's coming out of committee. You want to see passion? Watch us on the floor. Hagan and I
Any more questions? Oh,
Just to
Frank.
Our young people today really don't know the value of unions. It's pretty scary right now. My son was home from Texas during Christmas time. He had a bunch of friends over the house. He was explaining to these young people who thought unions weren't important. He told these kids, my son's a doctor, he's not a union person, but he told them, he said, you know, we got plants there, with the union people, the plants with on doing the same work. Union people are making $20 an hour, non-union people are making $12 an hour. They can't live. Our young kids don't realize that you have to stick together, earn the wages so that you can live. I'm watching kids now, they're making $12 an hour in the county. They're getting benefits. They're working full-time and they're getting benefits because their full-time job doesn't pay enough for them to live. This has to be changed, it really does.
I got one quick story. I shared it with the Reuthers last night. Alex, we heard some comments earlier on today about how their vote went down 2-1. Okay, my wife runs a daycare center. She has a Valorant employee, works 40 hours a week plus, and works for that company. His wife works in the healthcare system, and they still qualify for public assistance for their children. So that tells you the kind of money that these folks are making. It's a travesty that 2 people working full time and still get public assistance for their health care or for their child care. So when they talk about this, they're talking about it for some anti-union reasons, and everybody's scared to death to lose their job. What do you think those sit-downers did when they sat down? They didn't have a contract to protect them. They sat down and said, you know what, it's too bad. We're going to take it on the chin, and whatever it's going to be is going to be. And you know, every generation has a revolution. We may need one here soon.
Thank you, of course, to. Oh, sorry.
Probably not many.
And they're screwing, basically their own back.
Right. First, everybody, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out today. I know some people are starting to leave. I'd like to thank Sasha and Sonya for driving down from New York. And sharing this wonderful experience with all of us and teaching us that, you know, we're not in this alone. No matter how bad we think we are, we're not in it alone. Somebody was there before us. Somebody's going to be there after us. We need to carry the torch while it's ours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And just if anybody is interested in keeping in touch, we do have a website, brothersontheline.com, also a Facebook page, which is /brothersontheline. And often I'm sort of communicating with anyone. So post on the page, an email through the website, and further.
Okay.